Hello, and welcome to the first episode of BioTalk, where we will be talking about all things bioethics, really, but especially those issues related to human biotechnology. Issues like cloning, stem cell research, genetic engineering, and even transhumanism. My name is Chelsea Zimmerman. I am a pro-life Catholic writer, editor, and blogger. My personal website and blog is reflectionsofaparalytic.com. I also write and edit for catholiclane.com and for the website ignitumtoday.com. In this episode, I'm speaking with Rebecca Taylor about prenatal genetic testing and the unethical ways that it is being used and can be used in the future. Rebecca is a clinical laboratory specialist in molecular biology. She's also a practicing Catholic and blogs at marymeetsdolly.com. She's been writing and speaking about Catholicism and biotechnology for 6 years now and is a regular on Catholic radio. Let's get started. Welcome, Rebecca, again.
Thank you for having me. It's really a lot of fun.
All right. Well, one of the things I wanted to talk about today is there's a new genetic test out you wrote about recently, that there's a new genetic test developed for autism. I think one of the concerns that a lot of pro-lifers have about that is that, how soon is this going to be used prenatally? Because we see that a lot with Down syndrome and spina bifida and other diseases where, we're developing genetic tests to be used earlier and earlier. And we're finding that, instead of being used to help treat people prenatally, when they're used earlier, they're being used to actually kill people before they're born. So
yeah.
So let's just kind of talk about that.
The test that was developed, they found several what we call markers or kind of areas of the DNA that would indicate a predisposition to autism, it's an Australian company, and they say that they can predict autism about 70% of the time. Mm-hmm. And what this means is, it just means that these genetic markers are highly correlated with autism. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they cause autism. It's not a definitive yes or no on the genetic cause, that there's a genetic cause. Just like, it's a funny analogy, but it really works. Just because some things are correlated doesn't necessarily mean one causes the other. For example, just because you see a bunch of tall people playing basketball does not mean that playing basketball makes you tall. So, there could still be a environmental trigger or something like that. And the concern here obviously is that this is going to, right now it's being used as a diagnostic tool for children, which is really, really important. It's not something that we want to downplay because, part of the issue with autism is diagnosis, and you get to it early and there's better treatments and that kind of thing. The concern is that this test will be used prenatally, with a 70%, what they say, success rate in predicting autism. That could easily be used to, target those with autism in the womb before we whether or not they actually have autism, which is the way Down syndrome went, and others, cystic fibrosis, Tay-Sachs, and this really is the biggest problem, I think, in the medical community, is that they really think that terminating pregnancies of children that have a prenatal diagnosis is actually like treating the disease. I don't know where we got that fallacy, but it isn't. You're just getting rid of the people who have the disease. It doesn't actually treat anything. 90% of Down syndrome kids, that's the estimation, are aborted. That's not treating Down syndrome. That's just making sure nobody with Down syndrome gets born. Make another analogy. It's like, why would we take that approach? We don't take that approach with cancer. It's not like we take everybody with cancer, diagnose them, round them up, and euthanize them, and then call it good and say cancer's been cured. And that is, unfortunately, the way things are going, and I write a lot about this on my blog, and I try to do my best to educate people. That's not the right approach. IVF with prenatal genetic diagnosis, or prenatal testing with the intent to abort if things aren't perfect. is just really throwing the baby out with the dirty genetic bathwater. It really is not the right approach. It's not medicine, for sure. And it really isn't going to fix the problem. It's a totally, bass-ackwards way of trying to deal with disease. Because the reality is, people are always going to get cancer. We can't control every mental factor. We can't control every single cell division and make sure every single one is done perfectly so that no one will ever get cancer again. What we can do is try to treat the cancer. And, we're never going to prevent every single person in the world from being born free of genetic disease. And that's never going to happen. We're always going to have people born with genetic disease. And so our approach should always be to try to treat the disease and not actually try to get rid of the person with the disease, which seems to be the approach that a lot of people on the left prefer. Or I think in general population, I think they're really confused about what that actually means.
Right. Well, but at the same time, and you've written about this, I've written about this. We don't want to throw the genetic testing out with
No.
with
Right.
the way the bad ways it's being used. That
Right.
doesn't mean that the testing itself is wrong. And,
Right.
And so
that's something that as pro-lifers we like to do a lot. We like to lump the prenatal testing in with the abortion and call everything bad. That's really not the right approach for us either, because genetic testing, prenatal genetic testing, and prenatal testing in and of itself can be a moral good, and to really taint everything because of the real evil, which is abortion. That's the real evil. In a world without abortion on demand, prenatal testing would be what it's meant to be, a look inside the womb at the life growing inside, and it would end there. It wouldn't necessarily be a death sentence, which is what it is now. And so it's really important for us pro-lifers to make sure that we focus our objections on the abortion and not actually the genetic testing. And so, it might just be that that's the career I chose, but I don't see genetic testing as inherently immoral, unless, of course, it's undertaken with the intent to abort. But we can use that information in unethical ways, and that's where our problem is, and that's where our objection should lie, is in the unethical use of that information, and not actually try to prohibit the testing itself. I think it's not the right way to go. I think pro-choicers would love us to go down that road. I think they'd love us to say, oh, let's just restrict the testing and leave the abortion alone. And it's like, no, that's not where we're going to go with this. We have to really focus on what it is that's the problem.
Yeah, and I sometimes wonder, when I write about this stuff and I think about, what the real problem is and what the real issue is we're dealing with, and the question becomes, well, how do we fix that? What what should our focus be? Now, obviously, it's on, the evil of abortion and that kind of thing. But also, like you said, it's a problem with the medical community. And what I've noticed, obviously, it's a problem with how we view life with a disability and life with, diseases and things. It's kind of like they say, oh, we want to cure things. Well, if things like Down syndrome and, things like that don't have a cure, it's kind of like, well, we don't really want people to live with these diseases. So, this is
right.
This is the compassionate way of not letting them, suffer with these diseases. Now, anybody who knows a child with Down syndrome knows that they're not suffering. These kids are some of the happiest kids you've ever met, you've ever seen in your life. And really, when you poll people, I mean, obviously myself, I have a disability, and I don't think my life sucks and is awful and terrible, and I'm just, barely getting by every day. It's hard for me to even get out of bed. Like, I live my life, and I think I have a great life. And even children with these disabilities, there was a poll not too long ago from Newcastle University. It was kids with cerebral palsy,
right.
And the kids polled, when they polled the actual kids who live with these disabilities themselves, they actually had the same, whatever you want to call it, happiness meter as normal able-bodied children. And so, you know, we want to fight abortion, but we also need to fight this call it prejudice that still exists against people with disabilities. This idea that life with a disability is just not worth living. And so, you know, so on the one hand, yeah, you know, you do these genetic tests are good, and once as science develops, you know, we'll be able to, we can already treat children in the womb with spina bifida. They're treated in the womb with spina bifida to help lessen, I mean, it doesn't reverse everything, but it helps, you know, lessen the severity of the disability and that kind of thing. And but it is too, you know, a problem with the medical community and this sort of, you know, this prejudice, this idea that life with a disability is just, you know, not worth living, and it's so god awful that we have to prevent these people from being born. You know, if that's the kind of mindset we have there. And so that's kind of what I try to do. A lot of my writing and the work that I do is, you know, help people see that, you know, yes, we want to treat diseases, and we want to, you know, we don't want people to have disabilities and diseases, but that doesn't mean that their life is less valuable, you know, and it's not worth living.
Right. And I think that is what we're saying when we take the approach of the prenatal, you know, seek and destroy mission, you know, as opposed to actually trying to cure the disease. And we're seeing that, you know, you're better off dead than sick or disabled. And, you know, what does that say to the people that actually make it out of the womb?
Or the people, those of us living with, those of us living with
or living with, you're basically, and, you know, somehow it's more compassionate to kill them, you know, as opposed to trying to give them the best life possible. I mean, the true compassionate thing to do is to work for a cure, you know, because that covers everyone, not just the people that happen to make it out of the womb. You know, it's for everyone who is born with genetic disease. I mean, we really have to abandon this idea that the best way to quote, you know, deal with disease is to just make sure no one with it is ever born, or, you know, and because that's really the eugenic way of doing things. And it's never been the right way. It always leads to total disaster. And we really, as a medical community, we really have to press our doctors and nurses, our ultrasound techs, our genetic counselors,
medical students, training the next generation of medical students.
Yeah.
But, you know.
Yeah, when we see that attitude, we need to call it out and really fight it and say, look, that's not an appropriate attitude to have. You know, you're basically saying that people with genetic disease or who are disabled really don't have a life worth living, which is totally not true. If you ask them, they will tell you. You know, I know a girl who has cystic fibrosis. She was diagnosed in utero. Her parents were pressured to abort. Frankly, it's a miracle. She has no symptoms. She's totally healthy. And, you know, that's the other thing about genetics. You know, when you've got let's see, that's autism test, it's predicted 70% of the time. Well, what about the other 30%? You know, so it's really not even the right approach. Death is not medicine. I keep saying that. You know,
killing is not a cure. You know,
it's not a cure. It's not medicine, and we need to stop seeing death as an option.
And
you know, it's not an option at the end of life, and it's not an option, you know, it's not an option at the beginning of life, and we should always reject that as a medical treatment.
And it negates all the work we've done for, you know, people with disabilities. And that's the other thing we need to do is, you know, all the ADA stuff, you know, all the work we've done to help people with disabilities in, you know, be active in the community. This just negates all of that, this mindset and this approach that people with disabilities shouldn't even be born. I don't even know how to pronounce this guy's name. Julian Savulescu?
Savulescu, I think is how you say it. And he is discussing basically screening out embryos on, you know, single gene traits for, you know, sympathy and morality. And is a ridiculous notion. Anybody in genetics knows that genetics is way more complex than that. There's a whole nother level of environment that goes in. So if you're tossing out embryos with the arrogant notion that you could possibly tell who is going to be the most moral or the most sympathetic or the nicest embryo out of the bunch, He says we have more obligation to do that. Well, that's just a ridiculous idea altogether. And, so I don't even know. And he's really insidious because he sounds really good.
Right.
That sounds like a nice idea. But the reality is he's telling parents that it's not okay for you to have and to love your children as they are and to have who you're going to have and who God gives you. He's telling you that's not okay. And you are morally obligated to have the best children possible. And where does that moral obligation, how far does that moral obligation go? Are you required to never have a child who might be antisocial or ADHD or autistic or all of those things? He's basically saying, we're supposed to just abandon those folks altogether and they're just totally hopeless and we can't work with them. So let's just make sure they're never born in the first place. Again, it's a totally backward approach. What we need to be doing is loving the children that we are given, that God gave us, because obviously He has a purpose for them. And treating their diseases and helping them live the fullest, most fulfilled lives that they can have, and without putting judgment on whether or not they should have been born.
Now, looking towards the future, towards what we talked about in our last interview with the 3.0 issues, we're not even just talking about only letting the perfect babies be born and killing other babies. In the future, we're possibly talking about designing perfect babies.
Yes.
Being able to test for these diseases and then change the genetics in the womb.
Yeah.
And
you know what? There's a fine line there because we Catholics can support gene therapy, right, to cure genetic disease. Because we want to eliminate suffering, we do want to eliminate disease, and that actually doesn't, change. That doesn't, kill the child. That would actually, treat the child. But there is a fine line between that and taking the same technology and enhancing us beyond what nature could possibly do.
But that's just another aspect of this sort of, gene testing, and you have a market for people going in, doing IVF and things to specifically have girls, to specifically have a certain, not just, whether it's a moral, whether they're testing the genes for, morality and things, we already are seeing it for, just male, the sex.
Yeah.
And we're not talking about, we're talking about parents actually literally going in to design the child they want. And and that's something we have to think about too. Towards the future, we like to believe that that's not possible and it's never going to happen. Parents aren't really going to be, I want my child to have this color eyes, and I want this. We already have people doing that today, and it's the more we get into this whole with genetics and the genetic testing and the that kind of thing, it's just getting worse, and that's another aspect of it we don't really talk about whenever we, talk about these things. We talk, obviously with the abortion issue, it's right here, it's right now, it's something we're familiar with talking about. But, when we talk about those 3.0 issues, again, that, we're not necessarily focused on, the whole designer baby thing is happening. And it's
all the same continuum. It's all this, I have the right to have a child, right? So at first I have a right to not have a child. Then I have the right to have a child. And then I have the have a child that I want to have, right? And then I have the right to design the child of the future, who's smarter, faster, has a higher IQ than everyone else. And really, it all turns, every single one of those, the 1.0 to 2.0 to 3.0 issues, all turn children into commodities to be bought, sold, ordered up. And really, that is never, it's all the same continuum, and unless we really nip this in the bud, we are going to have a situation where parents are actually morally obliged, like in Gattaca, to genetically engineer their children, because otherwise, anything less than that, and you're going to be considered evil, because you aren't trying to choose the best child, quote unquote. They keep saying that, our race will be better for it. It's not going to be better for it. The eugenic mentality has never been a good idea. It didn't work the first time, or however many times it's been tried.
It's just going to make us treat the other imperfect people even worse. All right. Well, I think we covered everything we could possibly cover about this issue, and so hopefully we'll do more of these in the future. Maybe get this thing going on a regular basis, talking about these issues. If anybody is interested in watching, we're interested in talking about it, so there's that.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much, Chelsea, for setting this up, and I think in the future, if this will be beneficial, I think, and talking about it is important. So, thank you so much for setting that up.
Thank you. Thank you so much for tuning in to this little experiment of ours. We plan on coming up with our own topics for discussion in future videos, but please feel free to let us know if there's anything you'd like to know more about, especially related to human biotechnology and some of the issues we've already brought up here in this video. Unfortunately, these issues don't always get a whole lot of attention among pro-lifers. Obviously, after 40 years and over 50 million unborn children dead, abortion remains our highest pro-life priority, especially here in America. But if we don't start talking about these other issues now, and more importantly, doing something about them, they're going to get just as out of hand as abortion is today. So, like I said, if there's anything you want to know more about that you want to suggest to us, I do not allow comments on my YouTube videos, but I will post a link in the info box below to a post on my website that you can leave comments on. And by the way, if you were wondering in the interview what I meant when I kept referring to 3.0 issues, I will also put an annotation up here somewhere with a link to our previous video where we talked about pro-life 1.0, pro-life 2.0, and pro-life 3.0 and what that all means. So thanks again for tuning in, and hopefully we'll see you here again soon. Bye-bye.